As usual, another great guest, but a quick diversion. You'll notice that our full name is the Marketplace for Health, Wealth, and Freedom. Well, let's talk about your health for a moment. If you'd like to escape from the stranglehold of insurance and be able to see alternative doctors or go across state lines for care, then you definitely need to take a look at patientempowerment.mpb.health and see if that's the fix you've been looking for. Now, let's get back to the show.
Welcome, folks, to the Freedom Hub weekly webinar. I'm Charlie Froman, and my new co-host, well, not so new anymore, Jim Graypeck from Pavilion. Our old co-host, Jeff Cantor, is getting better from a health scare. He's still uploading the videos to YouTube, where you'll find the recording here by the weekend. And thanks to Tom Luongo for stepping in here relatively last minute. Usually I'm booked out months in advance. I'm booking June now. But occasionally folks have things happen to them. And the speaker that you guys saw in Monday's email, Kate O'Brien, wasn't responsive. And I found out that she had left US Freedom Flyers. So we aren't having a discussion focused on the plight of pilots and passengers. I know a certain pilot participating today. Maybe I'll ask him what's going on with Flyers, but he hasn't flown in a while, so we'll see what he says, Dan Froman. But the topic today is pretty broad, and in the title of the email you saw that we asked if the spirit of the outlaw can trump the tyranny of the technocrat. And that should make sense to anyone who's paying attention, unless you're one of those sorrowfully stuck in mass form psychosis. Tom runs the newsletter Gold, Goats, and Guns. Although at his Twitter handle, you'll see it's not guns, but geopolitics. And that's a good word because we're all kind of worried that the occupant in the White House is going to get us involved in an intervention overseas that's none of our business and has no upside for us at all. And obviously it's a distraction from the collapse of the COVID nonsense. And it's not just nonsense, it's terrifying. The insurers are reporting excess death, in some cases of 40% last year, which can't be COVID because COVID deaths are down. And the injuries from the disability and death reports match those at VAERS and have to be something that impacted half the population, which a universal employer mandate did. So, this is a story the COVID tyrants are not going to be able to brush under the rug because you can't ignore excess death, all-cause mortalities. I'm very sorry for the victims that are going to keep exploding over the next year and beyond. Years ago, Tom was a blogger, and at his Twitter handle, which is fantastic, he said that he has to write. And you see in Substack where all the good writers have gone after being censored from the social media platforms. Writing blogs is what people want. They want something longer than the 30 words at Twitter. Facebook has become useless. Any good poster has been censored. I have one more day of a 30-day shadow ban for telling truth on Facebook, and my apologies, Mr. Zuckerberg. And LinkedIn isn't much better. I mean, I'm commercially, I sell the Forbes featured health plan that's sponsoring this show, but LinkedIn is kind of boring at times. You're trying to network and make money and develop partnerships, but you want to work with folks that share your views. When I taught history, one thing I learned was back when the workers in Philadelphia were digging ditches in 1776, they also were talking philosophy. They were smart people. You can be an intellectual and be a blue-collar worker. There's no reason to have an artificial separation. But getting to today's show, inflation is on our mind. It's going crazy. That's why we need to end the Fed. The interventions are ridiculous at this point, but the occupant in the White House is going to do what he wants to do. Homeland Security is now saying anyone that practices the highest form of patriotism, which civil disobedience is, that's what Jefferson said, is now a terrorist and to be targeted by DHS. We know the passports are meant to set up the behavioral control system to limit your banking, which is happening to the truckers in Canada, to limit your shopping, limit your travel, limit your learning. So, Tom, there's your setup. Go for a rant.
Well,
tell us who you are first, and then go on.
So I'm Tom Luongo. I'm the publisher of Gold, Goats, and Guns, which is both a blog and the monthly investment newsletter, which I publish through Patreon/Gold, Goats, and Guns. And I know that Patreon is a controversial topic, but they've treated me with a modicum of respect so far, and so I have no problem as long as they don't, as long as they don't mutz with me. I'm not going to, mutz with them. And we have a good community over there. And I publish a lot of stuff privately for my patrons. And you have to realize that not, what you see on the blog is only probably less than half of what I actually produce on a weekly basis anymore. So where we are in this moment in time, I think, is we've reached an inflection point on corruption, and we've reached an inflection point on the ability of the state to mandate how we are going to live our lives. And we see this because I believe this, because I think we've reached that moment in time where they have gone for everything in the West. They've gone for the dictatorial powers and have failed. Jacinda Ardern over in New Zealand last week called for the National Security Council to move the military and the National Police Force against the peaceful protesters in Wellington, and she was shut down. 4 days later, after he's cleared the truckers out of Ottawa, Justin Trudeau got on a party line vote, got an extension to the Emergencies Act given to him by his craven members of Parliament, but then was defied amazingly by the Canadian Senate, which never intervenes in the course of Parliament. And it reminds me of that moment back in 2013 when British Parliament went against David Cameron and told him, no, you're not going along with Obama's invasion of Syria, which was the day I started to become really geopolitically aware. And so those two events represent for me massive failures of whom I call the Davos crowd, or Davos, however you want to put it. The people who are nominally and associated with the World Economic Forum, who are pushing most of the COVID tyranny and the rest of what we've been dealing with for the last couple of years, in order to affect this quote unquote great reset of humanity's organization. And it's failing right in front of our eyes. They went for the big power grab and they couldn't maintain it in the two of the three places where they have the most control, which are all the Commonwealth states owned by the Queen of England, the third being Australia. And Australia is even now backing off on all of this stuff. Now, these people are not defeated by any stretch of the imagination, but we have reached what I would call peak Davos. And I do believe that probably by the end of the year, the entire kind of Davos meme that I've almost created on my own will likely be done by the end of 2022, because they made the mistake of coming out from behind the curtain willingly to say, hey, you're going to own nothing and love it. Well, with the caveat that, or else. And it's the or else that they didn't, tell everybody about until we got to, Ottawa a couple of weeks ago. So there's a lot happening, and it's going to be a messy collapse of the Davos world order that has existed that's been building for generations now. And there are multiple factions within this organization, and we know who they are, be it Wall Street or the Federal Reserve or the European bankers or European politicians that run the European Union or blah, blah, blah. There's so many different factions to this. But at the end of the day, it's all just people who saw an advantage of working with these people as a group in order to advance their own personal benefit, for their own personal benefit, all of the stated objectives of the World Economic Forum. And I firmly believe at this point that this theory of Davos is the most descriptive of the way the world currently operates. It's not going to operate this way 5 years from now. Okay, which is going to have to be a different theory because we're going to now be dealing with the breakdown and daughter products of what happens when a cartel of oligarchs fails and fails dramatically at a turning point in history. Last night, well, I don't know about you guys, but I'm doing this on 3.5 hours of sleep this morning. I've been chatting into a microphone and chatting with friends and colleagues all morning. After Russia very dramatically moved into Ukraine yesterday or last night, to finally secure its border. This is a geopolitical event of the 21st century. It is the statement by the Russians that the geopolitical game board has now changed. It is no longer a game of realpolitik chess, move, counter move. It is now a new game, and the Russians are defining the rules of it. And I want you to think about that very carefully. Even as libertarians, we have to get our hands dirty, understanding what's happening in geopolitics, and understand that at times, some of these actors are going to work against other actors in a way that advances our interests, our personal interests. And this is the way I see Putin's intervention in Ukraine. It's also the way I think I'm right about the way the Federal Reserve has been pulling back from the Davos agenda over the last 8 or 9 months in attempting to shore up its independence and future and begin raising interest rates at a moment when it is clear that the political powers that be, who are absolutely controlled by Klaus Schwab, that would be the Joe Bidens and everybody and all of the DNC and most of the RNC, don't want him to do this. But I do believe that very sincerely that Powell began a new long-term uptrend in the US dollar, even after all the trillions of dollars that have been printed, which everybody else has printed trillions of dollars as well. And he started a new long-term uptrend in the dollar, which is now actually accelerating this morning as we record this, which is going to last another 18 months to 2 years, possibly longer, and could destroy the European Union in the process. And the European Union is the seat of power for Davos. And it's the thing that they are desperately trying to keep from collapsing under its insane and crippled sovereign debt market. The European Union is looking at a sovereign debt crisis that dwarfs anything the world has ever seen. And I mean that sincerely. It doesn't matter that we're looking at a sovereign debt crisis 10 years from now that will be unlike anything the world has ever seen. But the order of operations is that in a world of Ponzi scheme style central banks, the largest Ponzi scheme can bankrupt the smaller ones. And that's where I think we are today. And it's a kind of analysis that I'm shocked that more people don't understand, because to me, it's not a hard analysis to put together, because you just have to understand the incentives of the people who are pursuing the policy. And in this case, the policy of the World Economic Forum is to do away with commercial banking, to introduce central bank digital currencies, which will usher in an Orwellian total surveillance state, which they just tried to push through in Canada, and they're going to continue to try and push through in Canada. And that means if there's no commercial banking system and the central banks can control everything and put 30% of us on universal basic income because they don't believe there will be any jobs for these people in the future, which is a belief system. It's not a reality. It's an expression of their own solipsism. Then does anybody really believe that Jamie Dimon or the head of the CEO of Goldman Sachs or the CEO of Citigroup, Wells Fargo, most of the city of London are going to be okay with doing away with their business? Because this is what we're talking about. We're talking about doing away with JP Morgan, Goldman Sachs, Wells Fargo, BofA, Citibank, RBC, RBS, Scotia Macata, Standard Chartered. Like, really? HSBC, really? I don't see that. So if we're dealing with conflicting existential threats to powerful men's power bases, then I expect them to start fighting amongst themselves. And we're caught in the crossfire. And that is what I've been trying to impart to people for months now, that it's not obvious, but it's explanatory of things like the leaks of insider trades, of Federal Reserve Board members, of the intentionally insane foreign policy of Joe Biden, the insane activities by Speaker Nancy Pelosi to try and push all the spending bills and tie them all to the debt ceiling raise, when that was the dumbest thing she could have. The only possible excuse for that was that she was trying to get, this was the only way for her to get everything passed, because she could have passed piecemeal versions of all of these bills if she wanted to, but she didn't want to, which meant that she needed to get them all through for a particular reason, which was to force the Fed to monetize another $6 to $7 trillion over the course of the next 5 or 7 years, ensuring that the Fed could not raise rates or end QE. Those bills were blackmail. It should have been blackmail back better, not build back better. So this is the way I see all of this playing out. And it's very hard for people to see it if you're not willing to do the nuanced work and not willing to consider the motivations of the men behind the policy, even though the policy is anathema to our personal belief systems, which it is, right? I'm as anarcho-libertarian as you will ever meet in this life. But the hard work comes when you sit down and parse out what everybody's motivations are. And once you do that, the world becomes a much clearer place. And it almost feels like you have the cheat codes to the world. And you use libertarian principles, you use Austrian economics to predict their behavior because you know what's going to happen. And this is what I do. This is how I approach the world.
So, Tom, that's great. Folks, if you want to ask a question, you'll see the raise hand icon under the reactions tab. Just look around your Zoom controls. You'll see mute, stop video, chat. You'll see the reactions tab or ... more to raise your hand. I'll ask the first question. Out of this Austrian analysis, which I agree, even when I got my master's to teach history, as a libertarian, you got that Rothbardian power versus liberty filter, which makes it easier to explain people what happened in history. If you don't have that benefit of that filter, I think it's harder to explain something to people, the reality. You have to have a filter that works. And so from that, I guess you have an investment newsletter or just a newsletter to... It's
an investment newsletter. I have it's a model portfolio. It's aimed at the retail level investor. It's modeled after the work I do. I also write an investment newsletter for Newsmax every month as well. I write Ultimate Wealth Report for them. And before that, I used to write Resolute Wealth Letter. And then a couple of years hiatus between them. And so after that first gig with Newsmax ended, I went independent and then basically modeled the work I was doing, and it's just rebooted it as Gold, Goats, and Guns, which is a variation on the similar portfolio strategy. And the portfolio strategy has been based on a good solid mix of high yield and a solid balance sheet style companies, and then proper investment hedges against your main thesis, and then some exploration plays and fun stuff as well. But yeah, I'm looking at a portfolio annualized return over the last 4.5 years that's running 20% per annum. And that's with some massive losers in there. That's how well some of the stocks have done. But yes.
Yeah, I think folks are going to want to contact you after this, and especially once the recording goes up on YouTube, because fear does make you want to seek out trusted sources to help you get through the chaos. And we'll get back under that high yield, balance sheets, good balance sheet companies, and hedges and exploration. Maybe some comparison with Adrian Day or Peter Schiff. yeah, how similar are you to them? How different are you?
Uh, Peter Schiff is a bit of a bone of contention with me. I'm publicly have called Peter out for being a broken clock. That's right twice a day, because I think the attitude of, hey, it's just by gold is not a good enough answer. And I used to be one of those people, and I tried running a newsletter like that for years. And when I was first working for Newsmax, first couple of years I worked for Newsmax, I did that, and it just didn't work until I had to sit down and really understand that capital flow, global capital flow, is far more predictive of what's going to happen next than just doctrinaire libertarian or Austrian business cycle theory. And that's not to say that Austrian business cycle theory doesn't inform the analysis, but it does. But it also means that you have to be looking at the global market and not just, say, the American market or whatever. And you can't just use the argument anymore, certainly not today, that, well, whatever the United States does will affect the entire world. That is not true anymore. In the purchasing power parity basis, China has a bigger economy than we do. Nominal GDP, we still beat them, but in terms of purchasing power parity, it's not even close. This is another argument that people make against Russia, for example. Saying, well, they have the same GDP as Canada. Well, no, they don't. They have the purchasing power parity purposes. They're actually bigger than Germany. I mean, these are very important issues that, in terms of real wealth generation for real people living in those real places. Canada's far poorer than Russia is. And this has to be stated clearly. We have to understand, when we're going to compare apples to apples and oranges, you have to do that. So I don't know. I mean, I think global capital flow is far more important and more predictive than domestic policy. I argue with this with people all the time, and I think that that there are members of the community are just on autopilot doing the doctrinaire argument because they don't want to go deeper and do the harder work, which is, how does this affect the Eurodollar futures market? How does this affect, German bunds? How does this affect, the oil futures and blah, blah. And you have to do this work. And then you also have to, at the same time, try to assess the quality of the people running these countries and then make an analysis and then make the analysis from there. I think it's very dangerous to not, for example, to not consider that Jerome Powell is cut from a fundamentally different cloth than Janet Yellen or Ben Bernanke. He's from private equity. He's worked, when he worked at the Treasury Department, he, helped cover up Solomon Brothers, help, push the Solomon Brothers, off into the hinterlands where no one was ever prosecuted, and then worked in private equity for years. I know people who know Jerome Powell. They are patrons of mine who know Jerome Powell personally. My take on Jerome Powell is that he works for Wall Street. He doesn't work for the Biden administration. He doesn't work for the globalists. He works for Wall Street. Whatever Wall Street wants, he's going to give them. And if Wall Street thinks that the globalists are going to feed them to the wolves and they're willing to defend themselves, well, then you have to expect that Jerome Powell is going to set monetary policy in the United States to protect Wall Street and to protect the New York Fed, because that's who he works for. And it doesn't matter whether you like it or not. It's true.
So instead of Peter Schiff or Adrian Day, even, you might characterize yourself more in the camp of a Mark Skousen, who's got the Austrian, but also the real world kind of analysis. I guess
I haven't followed Mark's work in a long, long time. And I will be honest with you. I mean, I would rather argue that I'm a cross between Gary North and Martin Armstrong.
Interesting.
Okay.
And how would you characterize those two, Gary North and Armstrong?
Well, Gary North is probably the best of the old guard, the first generation Austrian economists. North was the guy who in 2008 said all of this QE is not going to be inflationary because the Fed's sterilizing it all. It's not going to circulate. They're going to recapitalize the banks by paying interest on excess reserves. He said this in 2008. I agreed with him then. And you're right, Gary. That's exactly what's happening. And then Martin Armstrong, cycles analysis and his focus on global capital flow and being willing to analyze the market as a trader would, right, is very powerful. Now, I disagree with Martin about, his critique of the quantity theory of money and Mises's regression theorem and Gresham's law and all that, and which he talks about all the time. And I know that he's written things back to me in private reports because I have patrons who are, high level subscribers of his, and he's quoted me without quoting me and argued against me without attribution. But that's fine. I don't care. I don't take it personally. I think it's great, actually. I think that there are a lot of people in this world. To this day, I believe Dr. North is right, and that most people are monetary cranks. They don't have a coherent understanding and thesis of money. I think the next generation of Austrian economists, like people like Bob Murphy and Seyfedin Ammous and others, are really doing excellent work to build on that first generation's knowledge. And but we have to be careful. Like everything else, we have to always, trust but verify and do the a priori work to make sure that it's correct. I really like, for example, Seyfedin Ammous's argument about stock to flow ratio and trying to quantify the extent to which Mises's regression theorem expresses a commodity's monetary character. I think it's brilliant. And it's why Bitcoin is so interesting and so powerful. And that's why gold is so powerful and why silver is not a monetary metal anymore. For example, its stock to flow ratio is 0.
We'll get back to cyber currency because, like dollar vigilante, a lot of folks have separated from the Peter Schiff gold world again over the last couple of years, especially as people have been desperate to search for hedges. Before we do, Nikhil Gupta has his hands up. Go ahead, Nikhil, unmute yourself.
Hey, everyone. Thank you for this forum. Not sure this is the right space for this, but I was wondering if Tom and others can comment on the bloodbath today in the Russian stocks.
Sure.
I bought that. I caught that knife the other day with some of them down like 20%, but I've never seen anything like this today. I was reading some stuff on the internet. It looks like it's a lot related to the probably credit and currency freezing up and interventions in the ruble and the Ukrainian currencies. But if there can be some comment on the Russian stocks, because that was quite a shocker today.
Nikhil, it's a great question. And it's a question I've literally been asked by about 12 patrons already this morning. And my answer has been the same over and over again, double down. The Russian ruble is by far the world's most undervalued currency. By any rational metric, the ruble should be trading in the 50s, not the 80s. This is political pressure that cannot be sustained. The European Union has already come out this morning to say they do not agree with kicking the Russians out of the SWIFT system. This came from Germany and other members of the European Union. Do not listen to the people like Guy Verhofstadt and the typical Davos ankle biters. They do not set policy. They are order takers, not order makers. People like Olaf Scholz and the German chancellor Nord Stream 2 is going to go through. It's going to take some time, but the goal of this entire Ukrainian operation, I have been saying for weeks now, is to create the architecture for an independent European foreign policy. Okay. Centered around the European Union with Germany and France in the lead. France wants to be the new arms dealer of a new, tighter NATO that doesn't have as much US influence if NATO even survives this. Like I said on the outset, the Russian movement into Ukraine has created a new geopolitical game board. We don't know what that game is going to be yet. It's too early. I have some ideas about it. I don't want to spend a precious time theorizing about that right now. Give me some more time. I'll probably write about this on Friday. But I've been there. I bought Gazprom in my newsletter in July of 2014 at $10 a share. It dropped down to $2. I bought another tranche at $2 when Putin free floated the ruble and invited in Chinese currency swaps and put forth an economic liberalization package that looked like straight out of the Austrian playbook. I said, it's time to go on Russia, and the currency effects will get you the money back. So I would be buying with both fists here. And I mean that sincerely. This is not sustainable. It's not. That's not to say that if you still don't want to, what's the word I'm looking for? Layer in, right? As a trader, you should always be layering in. You should not be trying to buy everything right now, because, buy a quarter tranche now, buy another quarter tranche tomorrow, wait for a daily reversal signal, technically on the charts. This is something else I do for my patrons. I'm an accomplished technical analyst as well. And twice a week I do video market reports for my patrons, where I go over not just some general commentary about what's happening in the world, but then 20 to 30 minutes of going over the charts of gold, silver, Bitcoin, any other cryptocurrency someone would like me to, the bond markets, the euro dollar futures markets, the Dow, oil, blah, blah, blah. And I rotate a lot of things through, and to teach people how to read charts and how to make sense of, when they should time their buys, because timing is as important in markets as having the right thesis. It's very difficult to do when you're writing an investment newsletter, where you've got to write the issue in the end of February that's going to come out in April, right? That's what I do for Newsmax. It's nearly impossible to do it well. But it is what it is. So my personal opinion, like Gazprom, Sberbank, Yandex, and RSX, the Russian ETF, I couldn't ask for a better sale. It's like buying Bitcoin at 35,000 today. It's an insanely good sale. It was like buying gold a few weeks ago at 1780 an ounce. It was not sustainable. Okay.
And speaking of gold, as a quick follow-up, with the sort of currency war or whatever is going on behind the scenes right now, do you think there's a chance that Russia will just say, screw it, we're just going to say we're going to back the ruble by gold, or we'll have convertibility, something like that? Oil.
If they do that, then none of this will matter, because that will touch off a nuclear war.
Okay. All right.
Okay. So the short answer to that is no, but the Russians don't need to do that.
Okay.
The Russians are like everybody, like other people who still run a central bank. They want around 20% backing versus M2 in gold. It's roughly what the United States has. I might be a little less than that now because of the massive expansion of the balance sheet. I think it's probably down around 13 or 12%. Unless the price of gold jumps to $2,500 or $2,600 an ounce. But do that math. If you look at the Russian balance sheet, they're holding around 20 to 21%, roughly in that area, in gold relative to M2. And when they reach that level is when they cut off. They said, hey, we're not going to buy any more gold. And then, they started piling more onto the balance sheet later on. They don't have to do that. I think people should be more worried about the Russians demanding payment for their strategic commodities that they produce the marginal pound or barrel or therm of. And that list is lengthy, in one of either the ruble, gold, or Bitcoin. And all of those are possibilities. Now, with the new Russian regulations that treats Bitcoin like a currency, obviously gold, which you can, for example, buy oil in gold on Shanghai. And remember, there's a medium sour contract on the Shanghai market, which is very close to a Russian Urals grade. So what's going to start happening is we're going to start seeing more Russian oil being offered for tender on the medium sour contract in Shanghai, and people can trade there and settle in gold. They don't have to settle in yuan if they don't want to. That was one of the things that made that contract work. And it was a recommendation that Martin Armstrong gave to Shanghai. If you want people to invest in your bond markets and invest in your capital markets, you've got to get them a way to get past, to not have to hold yuan, which no one wants. So you give them the convertibility to gold, and they may never take it, but at least they have the option, and that will allay their worries. Remember, everything in currencies is about confidence in the government that issues it and the central bank that is the steward of it. And that's what we have to watch. Is anybody really worried that the Russian state is going to get overthrown? No, what you should be worried about is whether Germany's really tenuous traffic light coalition in Berlin is going to make it the next 3 months. Or Mario Draghi gets pulled out of Italian Senate by his hair. Like, we should be worried about Macron getting guillotined. And I'm not even being like, honestly, I'm not even being facetious here. When you take every option away from somebody and they have nothing left, and then you still claim the moral authority to run the country, that's when the guillotines come out. Justin Trudeau met that moment this week, and then started a bank run against Canadian assets, making Canada now, uninvestable, and people pulling their money out of the Canadian banks. And I'm telling you, even though the Emergencies Act is gone, he's completely damaged Canada's reputation as an investable country. And that will be gone for a long time, or at least until he's gone and the Canadian Constitution is rebuilt. So me personally, I think Putin is probably the safest of any world leader today. Politically, they're like singing his praises over in Russia. He just salvaged his presidency. So, we can screw with their bond markets. We can cause the bond market to go flat, and the yield curve to go flat and invert and do all sorts of weird things, which is what's happening right now. But a year ago, the Russian yield curve looked beautiful. Today, it's a mess. But it's constantly being attacked from the outside. Eventually, that will change. So, but again, I think the only real worried about at this point is whether Biden does something dumb, like say Americans aren't allowed to buy Russian stocks, and that at that point you'll be liquidated. And I hate to break it to you, but that's your real real political risk at this point. But there's a lot of people on Wall Street that want to buy Gazprom at 3.5, at a PDE at 3.5, and a price of sales at 2.2, because that's what it's trading at. And the whole Russian market is trading at a PDE of 3. And ours is trading at what, 25? I don't know. We'll see what happens. But in the short term, we're going to go through a dollar spasm, here, as global capital doesn't know what to do. So it's going to run to the thing that it needs the most of, which is dollars. And, there's going to be an opportunity here to buy good assets at literally stink bid prices. So as an investor, I'm always a contrarian. I always want to be hitting them where they ain't. So, okay.
Yeah. Thank you, Tom.
You're welcome.
This is fascinating. A couple of things. You mentioned the sobriety, in effect, of our Fed chairman, looking out for Wall Street, which is a safer interest in this context than the government, or the commercial banks not wanting to be put out of business by this government currency, or maybe even the Canadian banks pushing the Senate there to stop Trudeau's insanity. On the flip side, we've all seen the articles over the past year on the oligopoly control of a lot of businesses worldwide, from a couple of businesses, BlackRock, State Street, Vanguard, and them having investments in some of these novel technologies that are killing people now with the excess deaths. How does that dynamic mess up kind of what you're looking at, or does it not? I mean, they're all in the same boards, they're all sober.
I know. The big problem here is whether or not, we're being walked right up to the brink of another global financial crisis. Now, I've been asking myself for months. This is going to sound like I'm avoiding the question, but I'm actually trying to set the background for it, because I will say this: BlackRock is a worry and a danger. Larry Fink is all in with Davos and the climate change agenda and ESG and all the rest of it. He is getting free money from the Fed to buy up residential real estate all across the United States and turn it into basically Section 8 housing in the suburbs all across the United States. Okay. We're seeing it here, even here where I am in Florida. Right. So preface that with the following. The situation in Ukraine has made zero sense to me as an endgame outcome. I keep trying to parse the incentives of the people who are involved in this, and the vector cross product of their incentives does not solve, for lack of a better metaphor, unless the answer is crash the global economy, crash the governments, starve everybody, and go full scorched earth. I've been arguing that I hoped Putin wouldn't do what he did last night for this reason. Not because it's not, frankly, the right thing to do from a humanitarian standpoint, because leaving ethnic Russians to be slaughtered by Ukrainian Nazis is unacceptable. With American backing and my tax money going to pay for it my moral outrage over that is inexpressible. How vile I think that is. But in the realpolitik of the situation, this move by Putin is what he's been being goaded into to destroy capital markets. So now the question is that really the case or not? Because the European Union came out this morning and said, we do not agree with cutting Russia out of the SWIFT system. If that's the case, because that's the mechanism by which the global capital markets collapsed. You cut Russia out of SWIFT, forget it. Like Dow's down 4,000 points, dogs and cats living together, mass hysteria, like all bad, right? Don't cross the streams, right? From Ghostbusters. We're literally that kind of moment. So the European Union coming and up until this moment, I'm like, oh, they're going to do that. Who controls the SWIFT? Nominally the US, but who controls Joe Biden and the junta in DC? Davos. So if Davos doesn't want a collapse, we're not going to get a collapse. If they're worried that a global financial collapse right now would overthrow all of their governments that they've infiltrated, Germany, France, Spain, Italy, Austria, the Netherlands, Denmark, I can go on and on and on, the Czech Republic recently, Canada, New Zealand, blah, right? If that's the case, and they know that all those governments are going to get overthrown by a popular uprising and people, and literally they're dealing with that, then I don't know. I can see that not happening. And we've rushed up to the brink of it, basically economic nuclear war. And mutually assured destruction was just put on the table by Putin, and we've backed away from it. And if that's the case, then it's going to be a very messy 12 months, 18 months, and BlackRock is going to actually wind up on the wrong side of history. And provocatively behind the scenes, Martin Armstrong has been talking about that it's about time for BlackRock to hit a peak cyclically, that after, everything has a life cycle and a time associated with it. So it's very interesting that he's talking about it in that respect, and how BlackRock was built, properly. And now it's being run by, Larry Fink, who's not interested in profit. He's interested in politics.
Rothbard wrote about 100 years ago the progressive tendency of all the industries to cartelize. Mm-hmm. And he said all the cartelization efforts failed.
Always.
So
Always.
Is this BlackRock intermixing of all the companies, Fortune 500s, is that going to allow for some of the disruption you mentioned earlier? A lot of us care about disruption. We're commercially engaged in it.
Sure.
Better industries, better markets, satisfy customers, solve problems.
It's going to be horrible, guys. We're going to go through famines. We're going to go through supply chain disruptions that are going to continue. I mean, I don't have any good answers for you. Like, we're going to have to go through this because we're in really deep trouble. It's not just about markets at this point. Like, not only do I follow all this stuff, but I'm also trying to follow the changes and movements within the cultural malaise. Like, cultural Marxism is deeply embedded in the generations coming up behind us. I'm firmly Gen X. I'm 54 years old. I literally just turned 54, 2 weeks ago. We're part of the club. Outstanding. So 1968 for the win, baby. Saying. Yeah. 1958 for the win. Yes. So it's 68, remake 68, right? No, please no. So 68 represent, there it is. So I don't know. I don't have any good answers. Like if they cut Russia out of SWIFT, everything that they are the marginal producer of: aluminum, titanium, tungsten, single work unit, enriched uranium, oil, gas, wheat, urea, potash, palladium. We could go on. Become, at that point, you're not making stainless steel without Russian nickel, okay, or Russian chromium. You're not making, you're not making car frames and car engines without a Russian aluminum. You're not planting fields in Iowa without Russian fertilizers. And they've already cut off exports of fertilizer, of ammonium nitrate, for 2 months because they're shoring up their own domestic production. I haven't even got into like the real climate change that's happening within the Earth's magnetic field and all of the physics, the solar physics that's changing, and how that's putting pressure on the growing cycles. So we're preparing for the wrong climate catastrophe on top of everything else because of these friggin' Davosian evil bond villains. Like it's otherworldly how bad all this is. But we're going to have to go through it like the Russians went through post breakdown of the Soviet Union, and East Germany has gone through post the breakdown of the Berlin Wall. The strongest culturally, the cultural heart of Germany today is the Southeast, where AfD, where the Alternative for Germany is strong, and they're polling like 25 to 27%, but they poll 8% in Berlin, 7% in Berlin, right? It's the former East Germany that doesn't want communism, just like it's the former Soviet Union that doesn't want communism. It's why Hungary doesn't want communism, blah, 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 right? So, yeah, I don't have any good answers for you. We here in the West, the cultural Marxist rot is deep, and the aftershocks of Comintern are very, very deep. And I don't know that it doesn't, that we don't have to go through this before we come out the other side. So again, it's why my portfolio: gold, guns, food, land, oil, crypto. That's where 90% of it is.
But to get a question answered out of you on this, our friends following you and doing related things, we're all into disruption, innovation, creating new economies. Do you get into that much in your newsletter? Because you're right. I mean, it's comprehensive. It's culture, it's markets. What are some of your latest thoughts on people you like, what they're doing, commercial wise, entrepreneurial wise? Really give us hope.
I love the technology of crypto. Okay, I'm not necessarily a Bitcoin maximalist. I'm certainly not a Bitcoin maximalist because I'm an Austrian economist and I understand the law of diminishing marginal utility. And if there's a God in this universe that I believe in, I think I believe in that. I'm being facetious, by the way, when I say something like that. But the law of diminishing marginal utility is the thing that drives all human behavior, and everything else is an outgrowth of that. And if you're not willing to apply that in rigorously to everything, including money, then you're not a serious economist. Okay. There's no magic about gold, right? That's why I get angry with the gold bugs. I mean, I love gold. I love crypto. I love cash, but it's crypto to me is the technology, the most disruptive technology, because it is the disruptive technology, even if it's not Bitcoin, even if it winds up being some successor to Bitcoin, some privacy coin or some, stable coin platform or whatever it winds up being, because that's where all the dynamism is, because that's what's trying to disrupt the most important commodity in any modern economy with a reasonably sophisticated division of labor: money. You can't, a corrupt money begets a corrupt society. Money is 1/2 of every transaction in a modern society. Barter is subsistence farming. I have 14 acres here in North Florida, and I've done subsistence farming. It sucks. Pardon my French. It's hard. I wouldn't be able to do what I do for a living if I took farming goats and potatoes seriously. I would be doing that all day long because that's what it would take to do it right. Okay. We have to recognize that crypto or tokenization of our work, all money is effectively tokenization of our work and our time, right? Whether it's a gold, whether it was a rock of salt 2,000 years ago, or it was a cowrie shell, or it was a piece of paper, or it was a gold coin. The best technology that could tokenize our work and store it became money because we hoarded it versus spent it, right? That's how stores of value come about. Gold has technological problems to be used every day. Sure, we can have digital forms of gold, and there are plenty of digital forms of gold. And in a world of rapacious and maximally authoritarian governments concentrating large piles of gold outside of their control, not a stable form of monetary policy. Just not, because they have guns and they've got surveillance and they've got all of it. Like, those take it from you. So it's got to be something that's gun proof. And from the moment I read the Bitcoin white paper back in 2010 and wrote about it back in 2010, mined a 50 Bitcoin block back in 2010 on a personal computer. I don't have them anymore. They got stolen. Come see, come saw. But I knew that this was a disruptive technology that trumps all other disruptive technologies, because it is the mechanism by which all information can be tokenized. All of our identities can be protected against potential surveillance and potential censorship at as economic actors. Sovereignty comes back to you through the application of a sovereign money. Without a sovereign money, you are not sovereign. You're only sovereign here, but you're not sovereign. You're sovereign mentally, but you're not sovereign in the real world. You can't express your sovereignty in the real world. You can't express your sovereign rights because someone else controls the value of your money. Someone else therefore controls the value of your labor, which is anathema to everything good and decent and moral in this world. So again, my moral outrage over our monetary system is beyond compare, is beyond description. And yet, for right now, Jerome Powell may be our best friend that we have in this fight right now. I am, in that respect, I'm kind of a Leninist. Like, I believe in fighting with the good fight for the outcome I want with whatever tools are available to me, because you have to. And that's where we are today. But I think Bitcoin or something like it is, just an absolutely brilliant thing. And I think it's the most, and there's disruptive technology happening and decentralization happening all over the place. And when you pick a stock, you're always looking for where somebody is disrupting the market and doing something new. Someone asked me, I'll give you a perfect example. 4 years ago, my early on in the newsletter, someone asked me about pot stocks. One of my early subscribers, I had like 30 of them at the time, asked me about pot stocks. I'm like, who's disrupting the marijuana market? It isn't the people growing marijuana. That's a commodity. That's like saying, I want to buy oil wells. I don't want to buy oil wells. I want to buy the guys who ensure the fact that the oil is going to come out of the ground and be marketed and moved around the world. I bought Scott's Miracle-Gro because they were moving in to monopolize the hydroponics market that would create the modern marijuana industry, because it's all going to be grown hydroponically. Guess what? That investment's up over 250% over 4 years. Paying, relative to my initial buy-in price, paying 12% annually now with special dividends here and there. That's the kind of thing that's what you're always looking for, right? So like hydroponics at this point becomes a disruptive technology, especially if people have to grow their own food. And we have, empty apartment buildings that are half built and we need to grow food in them, which is going to happen as well. So we'll see.
dumb question here. If someone starts to get your newsletter, which sounds like a good idea, very impressed with your presentation there, Tom. How mechanically do folks buy your recommendations? What is the process?
I publish the portfolio at the end of every issue. So you can go back through and look at the issues over that way. Then mechanically speaking, I'll give you a buy at or under price of, where I think you should buy the stock. I don't do this with any kind of tactical trading, right? It's a monthly newsletter, meaning it comes out once a month. So we're looking for investments that are going to be evergreen or trades that are going to be evergreen for at least 18 months to 2 years, if not longer. I have stocks in the portfolio from issue 1. I just published issue 54. So mechanically, you go to your broker, you buy the stocks that are recommended to you, and that's that. But none of this is investment advice, right? It is just ultimately informational purposes and the standard disclaimer, blah, 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 blah. Because I am just some guy on the internet with some opinions. I don't win with every pick. No one does. But if you can, if you can hit 60, if you can bat 65% in any, in any portfolio strategy, you're doing great. So I happen to have been on a roll because everything has come together in the last year and a half.
So folks, anyone have a question? Just unmute yourself. Anyone? And blurt your question out if a question comes to your mind. But Tom, we're out of time, and this has been fantastic. Why don't you say goodbye, final word, and how folks can reach you, and then I'll stop the recording.
Sure. So you can follow me on Twitter at TFL1728. That's my Twitter handle. That's where I'm at my maximal snarky, and I'm also nothing if not profane. You can follow me at Patreon, sign up for the newsletter, or just the market reports and the private blogs over at Patreon/Gold Goats and Guns. You can follow my work over at my blog at tomluongo.me, which is where almost everything shows up. And we also have a podcast as well. And I have people on, everyone from Dave Collum to Lou Rockwell to everybody in between.
So what about your wealth? If your money could actually talk to you, would you listen to it? Well, with the DNA Network Academy, your money actually can talk to you. And it's going to tell you just what it told this client. This family had over 24 debts, mortgages, car loans, the works. They were on track to take 20 years to pay it all off and instead did it in 8.5. Plus, they did it without refinancing, making more money, or even changing their lifestyle. So find out for yourself with a free analysis that is completely confidential. No personal information, no social security numbers, no credit checks, none of that nonsense. But what is exciting is that the outcome of that report you receive is a guaranteed outcome for you. To get that report, head on over to bit.ly/debt to wealth. You will arrive at this simple form. Fill it in as simple as lender number 1 and credit card number 2. What really matters is the accuracy of your numbers. You'll be able to see that if instead of 20 years or whatever your number is, that you may actually be out of debt and on your way to wealth in as little as 6.3 years like this client.